The rain lashed against the windshield of Martha's old sedan like 1,000 tiny hammers, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one raging in her chest. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, her eyes fixed on the glowing taillights of the sleek black SUV weaving through the mountain pass ahead. Inside that SUV were her 8-year-old grandson, Leo, and her daughter-in-law, Sarah. Martha's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Just 20 minutes ago, Sarah had stood in Martha's kitchen, her face a mask of cold fury, and uttered the words that had shattered Martha's world. "You're toxic, Martha. You're obsessed. From this moment on, you are no longer part of this family. If you ever try to contact Leo again, I'll make sure you spend your final years behind bars." Martha had watched in paralyzed horror as Sarah dragged a crying Leo toward the car, ignoring his pleas to stay with his Grammy. But Martha knew something Sarah didn't, or perhaps something Sarah was willfully ignoring. The man driving that black SUV, the new friend Sarah had introduced only a week ago, wasn't who he claimed to be. Martha had seen the tattoo on his wrist when he reached for a glass of water, a jagged serpent wrapped around a broken crown. It was the mark of the syndicate, the very organization Martha's late husband had spent 30 years hunting as a federal agent. She pushed the gas pedal down, the engine of her aging Buick groaning in protest. The mountain road was treacherous, full of hairpin turns and steep drops into the misty abyss. Sarah thought she was protecting Leo from a meddling old woman, but she was actually hand-delivering him to a wolf. Martha checked her rearview mirror and saw a second set of headlights approaching fast, too fast for a civilian. They were being followed. The black SUV suddenly swerved, its tires screeching against the wet asphalt as it bypassed the main highway exit, heading instead toward the abandoned logging trails. Martha's blood ran cold. That wasn't the way to the city. That was the way to the shadows, a patch of wilderness where people went to disappear. She reached for her cell phone to call the police, but as she glanced down, a deafening crack echoed through the air. Her side mirror shattered into a million pieces. Someone was shooting at her. Martha ducked instinctively, the car fishtailing as she struggled to regain control. She looked up just in time to see the black SUV disappear around a sharp bend, but a heavy-duty truck was now pulling alongside her, its bumper lined with steel reinforcement. The driver looked at her with a chilling, vacant stare and began to veer his massive vehicle directly into her lane, intending to ram her off the cliffside. Martha braced for the impact, her hand diving into the glove box for the one thing her husband had told her never to use unless the world was ending. The heavy truck slammed into the side of Martha's Buick with the force of a wrecking ball. The sound of rending metal was deafening, a high-pitched scream of steel on steel that vibrated through Martha's very teeth. Her car skidded toward the edge of the ravine, the guardrail snapping like a toothpick. For a heartbeat, the front tires hovered over nothing but a 1,000-foot drop into the churning river below. "Not today," Martha hissed through gritted teeth. She slammed the car into reverse, the tires smoking as they caught a patch of dry pavement. With a violent jerk, the Buick lurched backward, away from the precipice. Martha didn't wait for her attacker to make another move. She reached into the glove box and pulled out a small, heavy velvet pouch. Inside was a tarnished brass key and a localized EMP pulse emitter, a prototype her husband, Elias, had kept hidden for decades. He had always said the treasure of the elder wasn't gold or jewels, it was the ability to silence the noise when the world went mad. She flipped the safety switch and pressed the red button. A silent wave of energy rippled out from her vehicle. The massive truck alongside her suddenly sputtered. Its headlights flickered and died, and its engine let out a final, pathetic wheeze before the vehicle went dead. The driver wrestled with the suddenly heavy steering, but momentum was against him. The truck drifted harmlessly into a ditch, stuck in the mud. Martha's Buick, protected by a copper mesh lining Elias had installed years ago, roared back to life. She didn't look back. She accelerated into the darkness, her mind racing. Sarah was a fool, blinded by a whirlwind romance and the desire to hurt Martha for interfering in her parenting. Sarah didn't realize that Martha's interference was actually surveillance. Martha had spent weeks documenting the new boyfriend, Miller. She knew he wasn't a software engineer. He was a professional extractor for the syndicate, and Leo was his target. The boy was the sole heir to Elias's private, encrypted journals that held the locations of the syndicate's offshore accounts. The rain began to turn to sleet, making the logging road a sheet of glass. Martha saw the SUV's lights again, parked outside a dilapidated cabin deep in the woods. She killed her lights and rolled to a stop 100 yards away. Creeping through the underbrush, the cold soaking into her old bones, she reached the side of the cabin. Through a cracked window, she saw Sarah sitting in a chair, looking confused. Miller was standing over her, his polite facade gone. He was holding a handheld scanner, running it over Leo's backpack. "Where is the ledger, Sarah?" Miller's voice was like ice. "I told you, I don't know," Sarah cried, her voice trembling. "My mother-in-law mentioned some old book, but I thought she was just being crazy. I left it at her house." Miller backhanded her, the crack of the blow echoing through the woods. Martha flinched, her heart breaking for the woman who had just disowned her. "You lied to me," Miller growled. "But it doesn't matter. The old woman is dead in a ditch by now. We'll go back to the house and tear it apart until we find it." He turned to Leo, who was huddled in the corner. "And the boy comes with us. He's the biometric key." Martha knew she couldn't take on Miller and his guards alone with just a key and a dead EMP device. But she also knew this cabin. It was an old safe house Elias had used. She reached into her pocket and felt the brass key. It wasn't just for a box, it was for the floorboards. Just as she prepared to move, she felt a cold, metallic circle press against the back of her head. "Drop the bag, Grandma," a voice whispered in her ear. "Or the kid gets to watch you die first." Martha froze. The cold rain dripped off the brim of her hat, blurring her vision, but her mind remained sharp. The voice behind her was young, arrogant, and lacked the steady breathing of a seasoned professional. That was her only advantage. "I'm just a grandmother looking for her family," Martha said, her voice intentionally shaky, playing the role of the frail old woman Sarah thought she was. "Please, I have money in my purse." "I don't want your money, lady," the guard hissed. He was barely 20, wearing a tactical jacket that looked 2 sizes too big. "The boss said if you showed up, I should take you out. You're a lot harder to kill than you look." Inside the cabin, she heard Leo scream. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of pure terror. Sarah was shouting at Miller to leave the boy alone. The distraction was all Martha needed. "The boss?" Martha whispered. "You mean Miller? He didn't tell you about the gas, did he?" The guard hesitated, the barrel of the gun wavering slightly. "What gas?" "This cabin," Martha lied with the conviction of a theater pro. "It's rigged with a dormant neurotoxin. My husband was a chemist for the government. If you stand this close to the foundation without a mask, your lungs will seize in 3 minutes. Why do you think Miller is wearing those special filters in his nostrils?" The guard's eyes widened, and he instinctively took a shallow breath. In that moment of psychological weakness, Martha moved. She didn't use strength, she used leverage. She swung her heavy velvet pouch, weighted with the brass key and the EMP device, into the guard's groin. As he doubled over, she grabbed the wrist of his gun hand and twisted it outward, a move Elias had taught her in their garage 40 years ago. The gun fell into the mud. She didn't kill him. She didn't have to. She struck a pressure point at the base of his neck, and he slumped into the dirt, unconscious. Martha grabbed the pistol, a modern Glock, and checked the chamber. Full. She hated guns, but she loved Leo more than she hated violence. She crept toward the back door of the cabin, her boots silent on the rotting wood of the porch. Inside, the situation had devolved. Miller was losing his patience. He had grabbed Leo by the arm and was dragging him toward the door. Sarah was on the floor, clutching her stomach, trying to crawl after them. "You're not taking him!" Sarah shrieked. "I'll call the police. I'll tell everyone." Miller laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "The police?" "Sarah, the police in this county are on my payroll. And as for your mother-in-law, she's the one who's going to take the fall for this. A tragic murder-suicide. The bitter grandmother who couldn't handle being cut off. Martha stepped into the doorway, the Glock held steady in a two-handed grip. The report is going to need a rewrite, Miller. Miller stopped. He looked at Martha, then at the gun, then back at Martha. He didn't look scared, he looked impressed. He used Leo as a human shield, pulling the boy in front of his chest. You won't fire, Martha, Miller smirked. You might hit the only thing you love. You're right, Martha said calmly. I won't fire at you. She shifted her aim and fired 3 rapid shots into the propane tank sitting on the floor next to the wood stove. The cabin erupted in a roar of blue flame and splintering wood. The explosion was controlled but violent. Martha hadn't aimed for the main valve, she'd hit the pressure release, creating a massive fireball that acted as a flashbang. The sheer force of the expanding gas blew the windows outward and knocked everyone to the floor. Martha was the first to move. She knew the layout of the cabin like the back of her hand because she and Elias had helped build it as a contingency plan during the Cold War. In the chaos and thick black smoke, she stayed low, crawling toward where she had seen Leo. Leo! To the floor. Follow the sound of my voice, she commanded, her voice cutting through the ringing in the boy's ears. She felt a small, trembling hand grab her sleeve. She pulled Leo into her arms, shielding him with her body as a piece of the ceiling collapsed nearby. Grammy, he sobbed, his face smeared with soot. I've got you, baby. We have to go. Mommy. Where's Mommy? Martha looked through the haze. Sarah was pinned under a fallen timber, her legs trapped. She was coughing violently, the smoke filling her lungs. Across the room, Miller was staggered but alive. He was shaking his head, trying to clear the cobwebs, his hand reaching for the knife tucked into his boot. Martha had a choice. She could take Leo and run into the woods, leaving the woman who had just disowned her to burn, or she could risk everything to save her enemy. Leo, crawl to the door. Do not stop until you hit the grass. Go. Martha pushed the boy toward the exit. She turned and ran toward Sarah. The heat was becoming unbearable. The drywood of the cabin was an inferno. Martha grabbed a fallen chair and used it as a lever, straining against the heavy timber pinning Sarah. Her muscles screamed, and her heart felt like it was going to burst. Martha, leave me. Sarah wheezed, her eyes wide with terror and regret. Get Leo out of here. Shut up, Sarah, Martha growled, her face drenched in sweat. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because my son loved you, and Leo needs a mother. With a final, agonizing heave, Martha lifted the beam just enough for Sarah to slide her legs out. But as Sarah scrambled free, a heavy boot slammed onto Martha's hand, pinning it to the floor. Miller stood over them, his face scorched, his eyes burning with a demonic light. He wasn't interested in the journals anymore. He was interested in blood. He raised his knife, the blade gleaming in the firelight. You ruined a multi-million-dollar contract, you old hag, Miller spat. I'm going to carve the map out of your skin. He lunged. Martha rolled, narrowly avoiding the blade, but she was trapped between the fire and the killer. Sarah was too weak to help, and Martha was unarmed, having dropped the Glock in the explosion. Just as Miller pulled back for a fatal strike, the floor beneath him groaned and gave way. He fell through the rotted wood into the crawlspace, but as he went down, he reached out and grabbed Martha's ankle, dragging her into the dark pit with him. The fall into the crawlspace was short but brutal. Martha landed on a pile of rusted tools and old crates, the air driven from her lungs in a sharp gasp. The space was cramped, smelling of damp earth and decay. Above them, the cabin was a roaring furnace, and embers began to rain down through the hole in the floorboards. Miller was on her instantly. He was a predator, fueled by adrenaline and rage. He didn't care about the fire anymore, he only cared about finishing the job. He tackled Martha, his weight pinning her against the dirt wall. His hands found her throat, his thumbs pressing into her windpipe. You, die, here, he hissed, his face inches from hers. Martha's vision began to spot. The heat from above was intensifying, and the oxygen in the crawlspace was being sucked out by the fire. She reached out blindly, her fingers clawing at the dirt. This was it. After all the years of keeping Elias's secrets, after all the quiet protection she had provided for her family from the shadows, she was going to die in a hole, killed by a man her daughter-in-law had invited into their lives. Then, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a lead pipe, part of the old plumbing Elias had never finished. Martha didn't have the strength to overpower Miller, but she had the treasure of the elder, the knowledge of how things were built. She knew this pipe was connected to the old well pump outside. She didn't strike Miller. Instead, she reached for the valve handle just above the pipe and wrenched it clockwise with every ounce of strength she had left. A high-pressure jet of icy well water exploded from the corroded pipe. It hit Miller square in the face, the force of it knocking him backward. The sudden shock of the freezing water in the middle of a burning building broke his hold. Martha scrambled up, coughing and gasping for air. She didn't look back to see if Miller was recovering. She climbed the ladder built into the stone foundation, her fingers stinging as she gripped the heated rungs. She burst through the trapdoor back into the main room, which was now a vision of hell. Sarah was huddled near the door, barely conscious. Martha grabbed her under the arms and dragged her out onto the porch, then down the steps into the mud and rain. Leo was there, screaming for them. They collapsed in the tall grass as the cabin's roof finally gave way, crashing down into the crawlspace and sealing Miller's fate in a tomb of fire and stone. For a long time, the only sounds were the crackling of the flames and the heavy breathing of the two women. The rain continued to fall, washing the soot from their faces. Sarah looked up at Martha. Her face was a mask of shame. "Martha. I didn't know. I thought you were just trying to control me. I thought you were jealous of me moving on from your son." Martha sat up, her bones aching, her spirit weary. She looked at the burning ruins of the safe house. "I was never jealous, Sarah. I was terrified. You looked for a man who made you feel young. I looked for a man who would keep us alive. There's a difference." Sarah reached out to touch Martha's hand, but Martha pulled away, standing up stiffly. She walked toward her Buick, which was still idling nearby, its headlights cutting through the mist. "Where are you going?" Sarah cried. "We need to call the police. We need help." Martha turned back, her silhouette framed by the fire. "The police who are on Miller's payroll?" "No, Sarah. We aren't safe yet. Miller was just a soldier. The people who hired him are already on their way here. And they don't care about the journals anymore." She pointed toward the mountain road, where a line of 5 sets of headlights was winding toward them. "They're coming for the boy," Martha said, her voice trembling for the first time. "And they aren't coming to talk." The headlights winding up the mountain road looked like a glowing serpent, cold and predatory. Martha watched them for a split second, calculating the distance. They had less than 5 minutes before the syndicate's recovery team reached the cabin ruins. Sarah was shaking, her eyes darting between the burning house and the approaching lights. Leo was clinging to Martha's coat, his small frame trembling with a cold that went deeper than the rain. "Get in the car," Martha commanded. It wasn't a suggestion, it was the voice of a woman who had spent decades as the silent partner to a ghost. "But your car is trashed," Sarah protested, looking at the dented side of the Buick. "We should run into the woods. We can hide in the brush." Martha grabbed Sarah's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "In the woods, they have thermal imaging. In the woods, they have dogs. In the woods, you are prey. In this car, you are a projectile. Get in." They scrambled into the Buick. Martha slammed the gear shift into drive and swung the car around, heading not back down the mountain toward the police, but further up, toward the jagged peaks of the high ridges. Sarah gasped as the tires churned through the mud, nearly sliding off the edge of the narrow logging trail. "Why are we going up?" Sarah yelled over the roar of the engine. "We're trapping ourselves. There's a reason Elias chose this mountain, Martha said, her eyes fixed on the road. It's a natural fortress. There's an old mining tunnel 4 miles up. It's the only way out that they won't be watching, because according to the official maps, it collapsed in 1984. As they climbed, the first of the pursuit vehicles reached the cabin. Martha saw the flash of a spotlight in her rearview mirror. The serpent had found the nest, and it was angry. A heavy SUV, modified with off-road lights and a reinforced chassis, detached itself from the pack and began the ascent. It was gaining on them. The Buick was a tank, but it was an old tank, and the steep grade was taxing its radiator. "Grammy, they're coming fast," Leo cried, looking out the back window. Martha reached into the center console and pulled out a handful of what looked like heavy iron jacks, caltrops, forged in Elias's workshop. "Sarah, roll down your window. Throw these out, one at a time, every 10 seconds. Now." Sarah obeyed, her hands shaking as she tossed the metal spikes onto the muddy track. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a loud pop echoed through the trees, followed by the screech of a tire shredding. The pursuing SUV swerved violently, its front left tire disintegrating. It slammed into a pine tree, blocking the narrow path for the vehicles behind it. Martha didn't celebrate. She knew the syndicate. They wouldn't stop because of a flat tire. They would continue on foot or bring in air support if they had to. She pushed the Buick harder, the temperature needle climbing into the red. Finally, the mouth of the tunnel appeared, a black maw hidden behind a curtain of frozen vines. She drove the car straight into the darkness. The tunnel was tight, the stone walls scraping against the side mirrors. After 100 yards, Martha killed the engine and the lights. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. "We wait here?" Sarah whispered. "No," Martha said, reaching for a flashlight. "We leave the car. It's a decoy now." She led them deeper into the tunnel, her light dancing off the damp walls. They reached a heavy steel door set into the rock. Martha inserted the brass key she had used at the cabin. It turned with a satisfying thunk. As the door swung open, Martha's flashlight beam hit a row of monitors, all of them active, showing live feeds of her own house, the mountain road, and a third location she didn't recognize. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered. "Martha, what was your husband really doing?" Martha stepped into the hidden bunker, the hum of servers and cooling fans a low thrum beneath her feet. "Elias wasn't just an agent, Sarah. He was the vault keeper. When the syndicate first rose 40 years ago, the government realized they couldn't fight them with traditional laws. They needed a black box, a place where all the evidence, the names of the double agents, and the bank codes were stored. Elias was that box." Sarah walked along the wall of monitors, her face pale. One screen showed Martha's suburban living room, the place where Sarah had stood only hours ago and told Martha she was dead to the family. Another screen showed a grainy, thermal view of the mountain trail they had just escaped. The pursuit team had cleared the crashed SUV and was now approaching the tunnel entrance on foot. "You've been watching us?" Sarah's voice rose in a mix of fear and betrayal. "You had cameras in my house? In Leo's room?" "To keep you safe," Martha said firmly. "I saw Miller before you even met him. I tried to warn you, Sarah. I sent those anonymous letters. I called the school to check on Leo's security. You thought I was being a controlling mother-in-law. I was trying to build a wall between you and the people who killed my husband." Sarah sank into a swivel chair, burying her face in her hands. "Elias died of a heart attack, Martha. We were at the funeral. Elias was poisoned with a synthetic compound that mimics a cardiac arrest," Martha replied, her voice cracking for a split second before hardening again. "He knew it was coming. He spent his last 6 months teaching me how to run this room. He knew that one day, they would realize the treasure wasn't buried with him. They'd realize it was passed down." Leo was wandering toward a large wooden crate in the corner. "Grammy, look. It has my name on it." Martha turned, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't noticed the crate before. It was a new addition, something Elias must have arranged through a third party after his death. She walked over and pried the lid open. Inside wasn't gold or money. It was a series of leather-bound journals and a small, handheld device with a biometric thumbprint scanner. The ledger, Martha whispered. The physical backup of everything the syndicate wants. And the device, it's the decryption key. If we have this, we can go to the FBI. Sarah said, standing up. We can end this right now. The syndicate is the FBI in some sectors, Sarah. We don't know who to trust, Martha said. She looked at the monitors. The men on the mountain had reached the tunnel entrance. They were using a portable ram to break through the steel door. Suddenly, the third monitor, the one Martha didn't recognize, flickered. It showed a high-angle view of a coastal pier. A man was standing under a streetlight, checking his watch. Martha's breath hitched. Even in the grainy footage, she recognized the silhouette. It was the man who had ordered the hit on Elias. The architect. He's here, Martha said. He's not hiding in Europe anymore. He's in the city. He's come to collect the boy personally. The bunker door shuddered under a massive blow. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Martha grabbed the journals and the device, shoving them into a waterproof bag. There's an emergency exit that leads to the other side of the ridge, Martha said. But we can't take the Buick. We have to go on foot through the old mines. Martha, I can't, Sarah sobbed. My legs. I think they're broken from the cabin. Martha looked down. Sarah's jeans were soaked with blood. The heavy timber at the cabin had done more damage than they realized. You go, Sarah said, her voice steadying. Take Leo. Leave me the gun. I'll hold them off at the door. Martha looked from the dying door to her wounded daughter-in-law, then to her terrified grandson. The choice was impossible. Don't be a martyr, Sarah. You're terrible at it, Martha said, her voice sharp to hide her fear. She didn't wait for a response. She grabbed a rolling medical cart and pushed it over to Sarah. Get on. Now. With Leo's help, they hoisted Sarah onto the cart. Martha grabbed a heavy-duty tactical vest from a locker and draped it over Sarah's chest, then handed her the Glock. If that door opens, you aim for the center of the frame and you don't stop pulling the trigger until it clicks. Do you understand? Sarah nodded, her face white with pain, but her eyes showing a spark of the fire Martha had always secretly admired. Martha turned to a control panel and punched in a sequence. A section of the back wall slid open, revealing a narrow, rusted rail track that disappeared into the heart of the mountain. A small, battery-powered cart sat on the rails. It was dusty but functional. Leo, get in the front. Sarah, I'm sliding you in the back. The bunker door groaned again. A seam of light appeared as the steel began to buckle. Martha scrambled to the main console. She didn't just want to escape, she wanted to erase the trail. She pulled a glass cover off a black switch labeled Purge. Martha! They're through! Sarah yelled. The bunker door flew off its hinges. Two men in tactical gear burst in, their rifles raised. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired 3 shots, the booming echoes deafening in the small space. One man went down, the other dove for cover behind a server rack. Martha slammed the purge switch. Cover your ears. Martha screamed as she leapt into the cart and kicked the manual release. The cart surged forward, gravity pulling it down the steep decline of the mine shaft. Behind them, the bunker didn't explode with fire, it exploded with sound. High-frequency ultrasonic emitters, designed to liquefy internal organs within a 20-foot radius, activated. The screaming of the intruders was cut short as the heavy stone doors of the tunnel sealed shut, triggered by the purge sequence. The ore cart picked up speed, sparks flying from the rusted rails as they spiraled deeper into the earth. It was a terrifying, lightless ride. Leo buried his head in Martha's lap, while Martha held onto Sarah's hand, feeling the younger woman's pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. The air grew colder and smelled of salt. Martha realized they were descending toward the sea level. Elias had always told her that the mountains drank from the ocean. The cart hit a flat stretch and began to slow. They emerged into a massive sea cave where the tide was rushing in, the waves crashing against the stone pillars. A small, high-powered inflatable boat was docked at a stone pier, swaying in the dark water. Martha helped Sarah out of the cart. They were exhausted, battered, and hunted. But they were out of the mountain. "We have to get to the city," Martha said, looking at the waterproof bag containing the ledger. "We have to find the architect before he finds us. It's the only way to end this." "But how?" Sarah asked, clutching her wounded leg. "We're 3 people against an empire." Martha looked at the handheld device in her bag. It was glowing. A message was scrolling across the tiny screen, ** biometric override detected. Tracking initiated, *. Martha's heart sank. The device wasn't just a key. It was a beacon. And it had just told the architect exactly where they were, **. Suddenly, the water in the cave began to churn. A black submersible broke the surface, its hatch opening to reveal a squad of divers armed with harpoon rifles, **. "Get behind the pillars!" Martha screamed, grabbing Leo and dragging him toward the thickest column of granite. Sarah rolled off the cart, dragging her injured leg behind her, the Glock held ready. The divers didn't use bullets. They fired pressurized harpoons that hissed through the air like angry snakes. One thudded into the wooden pier inches from Martha's head, the vibration humming through the wood. "They want us alive," Martha realized. "If they wanted us dead, they'd have used grenades. They need the boy and they need the ledger." The divers began to wade through the waist-deep water, their movements methodical and slow. They were professional, unafraid of the chaos. Martha looked at the small inflatable boat. It was too far. They'd be pinned down before they could even cast off. "Sarah, the vest!" Martha shouted. "The pockets! Look for the silver canisters." Sarah fumbled with the tactical vest Martha had thrown on her earlier. She pulled out 2 sleek, silver cylinders. "What are these?" "Smoke?" "Flash flares," Martha said. "Standard issue for Elias's team. They don't just blind, they burn oxygen. Throw them into the water near the submersible." Sarah took aim and hurled the first canister. It splashed near the black hull of the mini-sub. A second later, a blinding white light erupted, so bright it turned the cave into a midday sun. The divers screamed, clutching their masks as the flares reacted with the salt water, creating a violent chemical reaction that hissed and boiled. "Now! To the boat!" Martha yelled. She scooped Leo up and ran, her old legs finding a reservoir of strength she didn't know she possessed. She practically threw the boy into the inflatable, then turned back for Sarah. Sarah was crawling, her face etched with agony. Martha grabbed her by the life vest and hauled her over the side just as a harpoon whistled past, slicing the sleeve of Martha's coat. Martha yanked the starter cord. The outboard motor roared to life, a twin-propeller beast that Elias had tuned for speed. She slammed it into gear and the boat lunged forward, skipping over the choppy waves toward the narrow mouth of the sea cave. They burst out into the open ocean. The storm had passed, leaving a cold, clear night. In the distance, the lights of the city skyline shimmered like a false promise of safety. "Are we safe, Grammy?" Leo whispered, shivering. Martha looked back. The black submersible hadn't followed them, but she saw something worse. 3 high-speed pursuit boats were launching from a hidden cove further down the coast. They were faster, larger, and equipped with radar. "Not yet, Leo," Martha said. She looked at the ledger device in her bag. The beacon was still pulsing. She realized then that the device was hardwired to her own heartbeat through a sensor in the handle she was holding. It was a dead man's switch Elias had designed. As long as she was holding it, the signal was live. If she let go, the ledger would self-destruct. "Sarah," Martha said, her voice low and serious. "I need you to take the wheel." Keep us headed for the industrial docks. Pier 47. Why Pier 47? Sarah asked, taking the tiller. Because that's where the architect is, Martha said. And because I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. But on my terms. Martha stood up in the rocking boat, looking out at the pursuit vessels closing the gap. She opened the bag and pulled out the ledger journals. She began tearing pages out, pages filled with names, dates, and the dark history of the syndicate. What are you doing? Sarah cried. That's our only leverage. No, Martha said, a grim smile touching her lips. This is the bait. And I'm about to go fishing. Martha watched as the pages of the ledger fluttered into the dark Atlantic. To anyone else, it looked like a desperate act of madness, but Martha knew the truth. Those pages were duplicates, fakes Elias had created to lead any thief on a wild goose chase. The real ledger, the treasure, was hidden in the memory of the handheld device, encrypted with a code only a grandmother's love could unlock. The pursuit boats were now less than 200 yards away. A voice boomed over a megaphone, echoing across the water. Martha! Stop the boat. You are carrying property that belongs to the collective. Return the boy and the device, and your daughter-in-law lives. Don't listen to them, Martha. Sarah yelled, though her voice was weak. She was losing too much blood. Martha looked at the city docks approaching. Pier 47 was a sprawling complex of rusty shipping containers and towering cranes. It was a maze. If she could get them into the maze, they had a chance. Sarah, when we hit the dock, I want you to take Leo and hide in the blue container marked Falcon. It has a false floor. Stay there until I come for you. What about you? Leo asked, his eyes wide. I have to go talk to an old friend, Martha said, kissing his forehead. She steered the boat into the shadows of the pier. As the rubber hull bumped against the pilings, she helped Sarah and Leo out. They vanished into the labyrinth of steel containers just as the pursuit boats roared into the slip. Martha didn't hide. She walked to the center of the pier, sitting down on a wooden crate. She held the glowing device in her lap. The moon came out from behind a cloud, illuminating her white hair and the steady, iron-willed look in her eyes. The pursuit team landed. 10 men in black tactical gear surrounded her, their rifles aimed at her heart. From the center of the group, a man stepped forward. He was older, dressed in an expensive wool coat, with silver hair and a face that looked like carved marble. The architect. Martha, he said, his voice smooth and cultured. It has been a long time. You look well, despite the circumstances. You look like a man who's afraid of a grandmother, Julian, Martha replied. The architect laughed. I am afraid of what you represent. The old world. The world of secrets kept in journals and loyalties that don't have a price tag. Give me the device, Martha. Let's not make this any more tragic. The device is linked to my heart, Julian. You know how Elias worked. If you kill me, the encryption keys are wiped forever. You'll have a paperweight, and the syndicate's bank accounts will stay frozen until the end of time. The architect's smile faded. Then I will simply take the boy. He is the secondary key. I don't need you alive for that. You could, Martha said. But you'd have to find him first. And this pier is rigged with enough C4 to send us all to the bottom of the harbor. My thumb is on the trigger. She held up her left hand. She wasn't holding a trigger. She was holding a small, silver remote. You're bluffing, the architect said, though he took a half step back. Am I? Martha asked. Elias always said I was the better poker player. Why don't we test it? Or, we can talk about the deal Elias made with you 20 years ago, the one you broke. The architect froze. He told you about the deal? He told me everything, Martha said. Including the fact that Leo isn't just his grandson. He's your heir. He told me everything, Martha said. Including the fact that Leo isn't just his grandson. He's your heir. The architect's face went ashen, the marble facade finally cracking. The men in tactical gear shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between their leader and the unassuming grandmother sitting on a crate. The wind off the harbor whipped Martha's white hair around her face, but she didn't flinch. "You're lying," Julian whispered, though the conviction was gone from his voice. "My son died in that accident in '05. He left no heirs. Sarah was just a girl from a Midwestern town Elias picked to play a part." "Elias didn't pick her, Julian." "Your son did," Martha countered, her voice steady. "They met in London while your son was trying to defect from the syndicate. He knew you would never let him go, and he knew you would weaponize any child he had. So, he reached out to the only man who could hide a person in plain sight, my husband." Martha watched the realization sink in. Sarah hadn't been an accidental addition to the family, she was a protected asset. Elias had married his own son into the cover story, and when Sarah's husband, Julian's son, was killed by the syndicate for his betrayal, Elias had stepped in to raise Leo as his own grandson, keeping the boy's true lineage a secret even from Sarah. "Leo is a Julian," Martha said, "but he has the heart of an Elias. He is the bridge between your empire and the justice my husband fought for. That's why the ledger is biometric. It doesn't just need Elias's bloodline. It needs yours." Julian stepped closer, his hand outstretched. "If the boy is my grandson, then he belongs with me. He is the future of the collective. Give him to me, Martha, and I will ensure Sarah gets the best medical care money can buy. I will let you retire in peace." "He isn't a trophy, Julian. He's a child," Martha said. She looked at the silver remote in her hand. "And I know what you do to futures. You twist them until they're as hollow as you are. I promised Elias I would break the cycle." "You can't break an empire with a remote and a fairy tale," Julian snapped. He turned to his men. "Find the boy. Search every container. If the grandmother interferes, shoot to wound. I want her to watch as I take my legacy back." The soldiers began to fan out, their heavy boots thumping against the metal floor of the pier. Martha's heart raced. She had bought Sarah and Leo a few minutes, but Falcon wouldn't hold forever. She looked at the handheld device in her lap. It was chirping, a low, rhythmic sound. "You're right about one thing, Julian," Martha said as the soldiers neared the blue container. "I can't break an empire. But I don't have to. You already did." She pressed the button on the remote. Instead of an explosion, a massive holographic projection erupted from the cranes above, projecting a live feed of Julian's face and his confession directly onto the side of a nearby skyscraper for the whole city to see. Julian stared up at the skyscraper in horror. The projection was crystal clear, capturing his admission of the syndicate's existence and his intent to collect his grandson. Elias hadn't just rigged the pier with explosives, he had rigged it with a pirate broadcast array connected to every major news outlet in the state. "You've just signed your death warrant," Julian hissed, lunging toward Martha. But Martha was no longer there. As the projection had started, she'd rolled behind a stack of pallets and vanished into the shadows she knew so well. She moved with a silent, practiced grace, her old joints screaming but her adrenaline masking the pain. "The boy. Get the boy now," Julian screamed to his men. A soldier kicked open the door to a red container, then a green one. They were closing in on the blue Falcon container. Martha reached the side of the container just as a soldier raised his rifle to blast the lock. She didn't have a gun, but she had a heavy industrial wrench she'd snatched from a workbench. She swung it with a grunt of effort, connecting with the back of the soldier's helmet. He went down hard. She pulled the door open and slipped inside. Sarah was huddled in the corner, the Glock trembling in her hand. Leo was tucked behind her, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "Grammy. I saw you on the building," he whispered. "I know, honey. We have to move now," Martha said. She helped Sarah stand. The bleeding had slowed, but Sarah was ghostly pale. "There's a service tunnel under this container. It leads to the sewer lines. Martha, he knows, Sarah whispered, her eyes searching Martha's. I heard what you said out there. Leo, he's one of them? He's one of us, Sarah. That's all that matters, Martha said firmly. She kicked a panel in the floor, revealing a rusted ladder leading down into the darkness. Go. I'll be right behind you. Martha didn't think. She threw the heavy ledger device at Julian's head. As he flinched, she tackled him, sending them both tumbling out of the container and onto the wet pavement of the pier. As Leo disappeared down the hole, a shadow fell across the entrance of the container. Julian stood there, silhouetted by the flickering lights of the pier. He held a small, elegant pistol in his hand. The secret is out, Martha, Julian said, his voice trembling with rage. The police are coming. My board of directors will have my head for this exposure. I have nothing left to lose. If I can't have the boy, nobody will. He aimed the pistol not at Martha, but down into the hole where Leo was descending. No. Sarah screamed, lunging forward despite her injury. As they hit the ground, a loud splash echoed from the harbor. A black and white police boat had arrived, but they weren't the only ones. A black helicopter was descending from the sky, and it didn't **T have police markings, **. The helicopter's searchlight swept over the pier like the eye of a vengeful god. The wind from its rotors was so powerful it knocked over empty crates and sent trash swirling into the air. Martha scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Julian was already up, his face twisted in a mask of desperate hope. The cleaners, Julian shouted over the roar of the engines. My board sent them. They're here to wipe the slate. Martha knew what that meant. The syndicate's cleaners didn't rescue people, they eliminated liabilities. Julian, with his face broadcast across the city, was now the ultimate liability. They aren't here for you, Julian. Martha yelled, but it was too late. The side door of the helicopter slid open. A sniper, wearing a high-tech visor, took aim. A single, suppressed shot rang out, not a bang, but a sharp thud. Julian gasped, looking down at the red bloom spreading across his wool coat. He looked at Martha, a moment of profound realization crossing his eyes, before he slumped over the edge of the pier and into the dark water below. Martha didn't wait to see him go. She dived back into the Falcon container and slammed the door shut, sliding the heavy bolt just as bullets began to shred the metal skin of the container. Down. Stay down, she shouted to Sarah, who was still at the top of the ladder. The bullets punched through the steel like it was paper. Sparks showered them. Martha felt a sharp sting in her shoulder but ignored it. She pushed Sarah down the ladder and followed, sliding the hidden floor panel back into place just as a grenade detonated outside, rocking the entire container. They were in the darkness of the service tunnel, the smell of salt and sulfur thick in the air. Leo was waiting at the bottom, hugging his knees. Grammy, you're bleeding, he whispered, pointing to her shoulder. It's just a scratch, Leo. We have to keep moving. The cleaners will have thermal scanners. We need to get to the main line where the heat from the city will mask our signatures. They trudged through the muck of the tunnels for what felt like miles. Sarah was leaning heavily on Martha, her strength fading. Martha felt her own body starting to fail. She was 72 years old, she had been shot at, blown up, and hunted through a mountain, and the adrenaline was finally wearing thin. They reached a junction where the tunnel widened into a massive Victorian-era brick-vaulted chamber. This was the Nexus, a place Elias had mentioned in his journals. We stop here for 5 minutes, Martha said, guiding Sarah to a dry patch of brick. She looked at her shoulder. The bullet had grazed her, but the loss of blood was making her lightheaded. Martha, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Why did Elias keep all this from me? I loved him. I thought we were a family. He did it to give you a normal life, Sarah. He wanted you to be a mother, not a soldier, Martha said. She reached into her pocket and realized she still had the ledger device. It had survived the tumble. And he knew that if you knew the truth, you'd never be able to look at Leo without seeing Julian. Suddenly, a soft clicking sound echoed from the tunnel they had just exited. Martha froze. It wasn't the sound of boots. It was the sound of a drone, a small, four-legged robotic spider equipped with a camera and a dart gun. ***. The drone rounded the corner, its red eye locking onto Leo. "Leo, get behind me," Martha commanded. The robotic spider chirped, its legs articulating with terrifying, insect-like precision. It was a seeker drone, designed for non-lethal capture of high-value targets. The syndicate still wanted the boy alive. Martha scanned the chamber. There was no cover, and they were trapped in a dead-end vaulted room. The drone raised a small turret on its back. Whip! A tranquilizer dart hissed through the air, narrowly missing Martha's ear and shattering against the brick wall. "Sarah, the Glock." Martha reached for the gun, but Sarah's hands were too weak. She had dropped it somewhere in the tunnel. Martha looked at the ledger device in her hand. It was the only tool she had left. She remembered Elias talking about the device's emergency feedback loop. It was designed to protect the data by frying any nearby unauthorized electronics. "Leo, Sarah, close your eyes and don't touch any metal," Martha yelled. She held the device toward the drone and entered a 3-digit override code Elias had made her memorize on their 40th anniversary. 7-1-4, the date of their first date. The device began to vibrate violently. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber, growing louder and louder until it was a physical pain in their eardrums. A blue arc of electricity jumped from the device's antenna, striking the drone. The robot spider spasmed. Its red eye flickered to white, then went dark. It collapsed into a heap of useless plastic and wire, smoke curling from its joints. But the effort had cost Martha. The device in her hand was now glowing hot, and the screen had gone dark. The treasure was safe, but they were now blind and defenseless. "Is it over?" Leo asked, peeking through his fingers. "The drone is dead, but they know exactly where we are now," Martha said, her voice raspy. She looked at Sarah. The younger woman was unconscious, her breathing shallow. "Grammy, look." Leo pointed to the far wall. Behind where the drone had been standing, a heavy iron grate was slowly swinging open. It wasn't being forced, it was being operated by a remote mechanism. A man stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't wearing a tactical suit or a wool coat. He was wearing a simple janitor's uniform, but he carried himself with the posture of a general. "Martha," the man said. "Elias said you'd make it this far. He had a lot of faith in you." Martha didn't relax. "Who are you?" "I'm the reason Elias was never caught," the man said, holding out a hand. "I'm the archive. And if you want to save that girl's life, you need to come with me right now. The cleaners are 3 minutes behind you." Martha looked at the man, then at her family. She had no choice but to trust a stranger in a sewer. As they followed him through the grate, he led them into a clean, well-lit laboratory hidden behind the brickwork. "Put her on the table," the man ordered. He began working on Sarah with the efficiency of a combat medic. While he worked, he turned to Martha. "The ledger isn't just data, Martha. You know that, right? You know what's really on that drive?" Martha looked at the dead device in her hand. "Secrets. Names. Money." "No," the man said, pulling a second, identical device from a drawer. "It's a map to the only thing that can actually destroy the syndicate. And your husband buried it under your own garden." Martha felt the world tilt. Her garden? The small patch of hydrangeas and tomatoes she had tended for 30 years while Elias sat on the porch drinking iced tea? The idea seemed absurd, yet perfectly like Elias. He always said the best place to hide a tree was in a forest, and the best place to hide a secret was in the mundane. "The hydrangeas," Martha whispered. "He always insisted I plant the blue ones on the north side, even when the soil wasn't right." "The soil wasn't right because there's a lead-lined vault 6 feet under them," the man, the archive, said as he finished bandaging Sarah. He knew the syndicate would eventually find his digital backups. He knew they'd find his safe houses. But he bet his life that they'd never think of meddling. Grandma was sitting on the physical evidence that could hang every board member in the world. Why didn't he tell me? Martha asked, a spark of anger lighting in her chest. I could have helped him. We could have ended this years ago. Because he wanted you to have 30 years of peace, Martha. He traded his soul to keep your hands clean. But now the garden is the only thing left. The archive turned to a monitor. The cleaners have reached the nexus. They're blowing the grate. We have to move. Sarah can't travel like this, Martha said, looking at her daughter-in-law. Sarah was awake now, but she was weak. She stays here, the archive said. This facility is a level 5 bunker. They won't find her, and even if they do, they can't get through the doors. But they'll be tracking you, Martha. And the boy. You're the keys. Martha looked at Leo. He looked so small in the sterile light of the lab. He was the grandson of a monster and the legacy of a hero. I have to go back to the house, Martha said. I have to dig up the truth. It's a suicide mission, Sarah rasped from the table. Martha, don't. Just stay here. We're safe here. No, Sarah. We're just hiding. As long as that evidence is in the ground, they will never stop hunting Leo. I have to finish what Elias started. The archive handed Martha a small, black key fob. This controls the perimeter defense at your house. Elias spent his retirement landscaping. You'll find out what that means when you get there. He led them to a small pneumatic lift. This will take you to a parking garage 2 blocks from your street. There's a nondescript station wagon in Bay 4. The keys are in the visor. Martha took Leo's hand. She felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. She was going home. They ascended into the night. The parking garage was cold and empty. Martha found the station wagon, a beige clunker that looked like every other car in the suburbs. She buckled Leo in and started the engine. As she drove toward her neighborhood, she saw the black SUVs patrolling the streets. The syndicate had cordoned off the block. Her house was surrounded. Grammy, how are we going to get inside? Leo asked, ***. Martha looked at the key fob in her hand. We aren't going to sneak in, Leo. We're going to walk through the front door. And if they want to see what a toxic grandma looks like, I'm happy to show them. She slammed the gas pedal down, aiming the car straight for the barricade blocking her driveway. The beige station wagon roared toward the barricade, its engine screaming in a way a car that old shouldn't be able to. The men in black tactical gear guarding the entrance to Martha's cul-de-sac scrambled, diving for cover as they realized the old woman wasn't slowing down. Martha gripped the steering wheel, her eyes locked on the space between 2 armored SUVs. Get down, Leo. Under the seat, she barked. Just as the car hit the wooden barriers, Martha pressed the first button on the black key fob. A high-pitched frequency pulse emanated from the car's front grille. It wasn't an explosion, it was an acoustic wave. The glass in the nearest SUV shattered, and the men standing nearby clutched their ears, collapsing in agony. The station wagon smashed through the debris, tires smoking, and fishtailed into Martha's gravel driveway. She slammed the car into park and grabbed Leo. To the porch. Go, go, go. Bullets began to rain down from the snipers positioned on the neighbor's roof. Martha's beautiful flower beds were chewed to pieces by the lead storm. She felt a sting on her cheek as a splinter of wood flew up from the porch steps, but she didn't stop. She reached the front door and pressed her palm against the doorbell. It wasn't a doorbell. It was a biometric scanner Elias had integrated into the casing years ago. **Scan complete. Welcome home, Martha**. The heavy oak door swung open, and Martha shoved Leo inside, slamming it shut behind them. A second later, the door shuddered as a hail of bullets hit it, but the wood didn't splinter. It was backed by reinforced ballistic steel. Grammy, the house, it sounds like a war zone, Leo whispered, his voice trembling. The house is the fort, Leo. But we need to get to the cellar, Martha said, her voice tight. She walked into the kitchen, which looked exactly as she had left it, a half-finished cup of tea still sitting on the counter. It felt like a lifetime ago that Sarah had told her she was no longer part of the family. She looked out the kitchen window. The cleaners were regrouping. They were bringing in a heavy ram, and she could see a tactical team preparing to breach the back sliding doors. They were through playing games. They wanted the boy, and they wanted whatever was buried under the hydrangeas. Martha moved to the pantry and pulled on a shelf of canned peaches. With a low hydraulic hiss, the floor of the pantry descended like an elevator. "Where are we going?" Leo asked. "To the roots of the family, honey," Martha said. "The archive said the physical evidence is under the garden, but the access point isn't outside. Elias was too smart for that. He built a tunnel from the basement directly to the vault." They reached the sub-basement, a room Martha had never been allowed to enter. It was filled with filing cabinets and a large, old-fashioned map of the world. In the center of the room was a single, heavy shovel made of a strange, dull metal. Martha grabbed the shovel, but as she did, a voice echoed through the house's intercom system. "Martha, this is the board. We have Sarah. If you don't come out with the boy and the ledger in 5 minutes, we start sending her back to you piece by piece." Martha's blood turned to ice. The archive's level 5 bunker had been breached. Either the man in the janitor's uniform was a traitor, or the syndicate was even more powerful than Elias had feared. She looked at the intercom speaker, her knuckles white as she gripped the shovel. "Grammy? They have Mommy?" Leo's eyes filled with tears. Martha knelt down and took his shoulders. "Leo, I need you to be the bravest boy in the world. I need you to stay in this room. There's a red button under that map. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you press it. It will seal this room and send a signal to the only people your grandpa Elias trusted in Washington. Do you understand? But what about you?" "I'm going to go get your mother," Martha said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. She didn't take the tunnel to the vault. Instead, she took the stairs back up to the main floor. She knew every creak of these floorboards, every shadow cast by the afternoon sun. She went to the hallway closet and pulled out a long, heavy coat. Hidden in the lining were the small, specialized tools Elias had spent his hobby time perfecting. She stepped out onto the back deck, holding her hands up. The rain had started again, turning the backyard into a muddy soup. 2 cleaners stood in the middle of her ruined hydrangea garden, holding a struggling, gagged Sarah. A third man, wearing a sharp gray suit, stood under a black umbrella. "Where is the boy, Martha?" the man in the suit asked. "Safe," Martha said. "Somewhere you'll never find him unless I give you the coordinates. But let's talk about the treasure of the elder first. You think it's the ledger? You think it's the names?" "We know it is," the man replied. "And we know it's buried right here." He gestured to the mud at his feet. "You're half right," Martha said, stepping off the deck and into the rain. "The treasure isn't the names. The treasure is the consequence. Elias knew you'd come here. He knew you'd stand exactly where you're standing right now." She reached into her pocket and gripped the black key fob. "What are you talking about?" the man in the suit demanded. "My husband didn't just plant flowers, Mr. Secretary," Martha said, her eyes flashing. "He planted a dead man's garden. The soil under your feet is saturated with a highly volatile, motion-sensitive liquid explosive. As long as I'm holding this fob, the sensors are neutralized. If I let go, or if you move more than 3 inches..." The men froze. The 2 holding Sarah looked down at the mud with wide, terrified eyes. The man in the suit sneered, though his face had gone pale. "You're bluffing again. You'd kill your daughter-in-law too." "Sarah is standing on the stone path," Martha pointed out. "The path is reinforced. You, however, are standing on the hydrangeas." Martha began to walk toward them, her thumb hovering over the release button. "Now, let her go, or we all find out what Elias's last invention feels like." The man in the suit hesitated, but then a sniper's red laser dot appeared on Martha's chest. The sniper doesn't have a steady enough hand to catch this fob before it hits the ground, Martha said, her voice as calm as if she were reading a bedtime story. And if I die, my thumb slips. You know how these things work. The man in the suit looked at the red dot on Martha's heart, then at the mud beneath his expensive Italian shoes. He signaled to the men holding Sarah. They shoved her forward. Sarah stumbled onto the stone path, collapsing at Martha's feet. Go to the house, Sarah, Martha whispered, never taking her eyes off the men. Leo is in the cellar. Go. Sarah didn't argue. She scrambled toward the back door, her eyes fixed on Martha with a look of profound realization. She finally understood that the meddling wasn't about control, it was about the burden of protection. Once Sarah was inside, the man in the suit smiled thinly. Fine. You've saved the girl. But you're still standing in the middle of a kill zone, Martha. Give us the fob, tell us how to open the vault, and maybe we'll let you and the boy live in a nice, quiet cell somewhere. I have a better idea, Martha said. She looked down at the mud. Elias didn't just use explosives. He used a localized tectonic disruptor. The vault isn't just a box, it's a trapdoor. Martha pressed a sequence on the fob. Suddenly, the ground beneath the three men didn't explode, it vanished. The garden beds collapsed into a deep, vertical shaft that had been hidden by a sophisticated holographic cover. The men screamed as they tumbled 30 feet down into a reinforced steel cage. Martha walked to the edge of the pit and looked down. The men were alive but trapped in a cage that was rapidly filling with water from the home's main line. The treasure of the elder is justice, Martha called down. And the water level will stop rising once you provide the override codes for the syndicate's global server. There's a waterproof tablet in the corner. I suggest you start typing. She turned away, heading back into the house. But as she reached the door, she heard a sound that made her heart stop. It wasn't the men in the pit. It was the sound of a heavy rotor, a much larger helicopter than the ones before. She looked up. A military-grade gunship was hovering over her house. This wasn't the syndicate's private security. This was a different faction altogether. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Martha Elias. This is the United States Marshals. Stand down and surrender the asset known as the ledger. We have the perimeter secured. Martha realized the truth in an instant. The archive hadn't been a traitor, but his signal had been intercepted by the government. Now, the people Elias used to work for were here to confiscate the evidence, not to use it for justice, but to use it for leverage of their own. Grammy. Leo's voice came from the doorway. He was holding the handheld device, which was glowing a bright, vibrant green ***. It's finished the decryption, he shouted. It's showing a countdown. Martha ran to Leo and snatched the device. The screen was flashing a 120-second timer. At the top, in Elias's familiar digital font, were the words, Final Settlement. It's not a countdown to an explosion, Martha whispered, her eyes scanning the scrolling code. It's a countdown to a global data dump. He's not going to give the evidence to the government or the syndicate. He's going to give it to everyone. Every journalist, every citizen, every laptop and smartphone in the world was about to receive the names and crimes of the syndicate. It was the ultimate treasure, the truth, unvarnished and uncontrollable. Martha. Open the door, a voice shouted from the front porch. The marshals were beginning to breach. To the attic. Martha grabbed Leo's hand. Sarah was already there, holding a kitchen knife, her face set in a look of grim determination. We can't let them have it, Martha, Sarah said. If the marshals get that device, they'll just bury the truth to keep the power for themselves. I know, Martha said. We just need 60 seconds. They scrambled up the pull-down ladder into the cramped, dusty attic. Martha moved to the small circular window that overlooked the street. Below, a dozen armored vehicles had blocked off the entire neighborhood. Neighbors were peeking out from behind their curtains, watching the fall of the Elias household. The marshals burst into the living room below. Martha could hear them shouting, the heavy thud of boots on the hardwood. Check the basement. Find the boy. The timer on the device hit 00:30. Martha, there at the ladder. Sarah hissed, pointing to the attic hatch. Martha looked around the attic. Amidst the boxes of old Christmas decorations and Leo's baby clothes, she saw Elias's old shortwave radio. It was plugged in, the power light glowing. He had kept it ready for this exact moment. Leo, I need you to hold the device against the radio antenna, Martha commanded. The device uses a localized broadcast burst. The radio will act as an amplifier. The attic hatch was shoved upward. A marshal in a tactical vest poked his head through. Drop the device. Hands in the air. Martha stood in front of Leo, shielding him. You're too late, officer. The truth doesn't belong to the government anymore. The timer hit 00:05. 00:04. 00:03. The device let out a sharp, digital chime. A blue light pulsed from the antenna, so bright it blinded everyone in the room for a split second. Suddenly, every cell phone in the marshal's pockets began to buzz simultaneously. But the marshal at the hatch didn't look at his phone. He looked at Martha, and he raised his weapon. Don't, a voice roared from below. The marshal hesitated, his finger on the trigger. A man in a suit, not the syndicate's suit, but a worn, navy blue federal uniform, pushed his way past the tactical team and climbed into the attic. It was Director Miller, no relation to the killer, an old colleague of Elias's who had actually been a friend. Stand down, Miller ordered his team. He looked at Martha, then at the glowing device in Leo's hand. He pulled his own phone from his pocket. On the screen was a list of names, men he had worked with for 20 years, now labeled as syndicate operatives. He did it, Miller whispered, a mixture of awe and terror in his voice. He actually burned it all down. He didn't burn it down, Arthur, Martha said, stepping forward. He just turned the lights on. Now everyone can see what's been crawling around in the basement. The tension in the attic broke, but the danger wasn't over. Outside, the sound of the gunship intensified. A second gunship was approaching. Those aren't mine, Miller said, looking out the window. The syndicate has cleaners inside the military. They know the data is out, but they're going to try to kill the witnesses. They're going to level this house to make sure you three don't talk to the press. We need to get out of here, Sarah said, grabbing Leo. The tunnel, Martha said. The one in the cellar. It doesn't just go to the vault. It goes to the old storm drain 3 blocks away. Go. Miller shouted to his men. Escort them. Protect the boy at all costs. They scrambled down from the attic and back toward the pantry. But as they reached the kitchen, the wall exploded. A missile from one of the gunships had struck the garage, and the shockwave threw them all to the floor. Dust and debris filled the air. Martha looked up, coughing. The house was on fire. Through the hole in the wall, she could see a team of black-clad operatives sliding down ropes from the hovering gunship. They weren't marshals. They were the last of the syndicate's elite, sent on a scorched earth mission. Grammy, the cellar door is blocked. Leo cried, pointing to the pile of bricks and timber covering the pantry entrance. They were trapped in a burning kitchen, with assassins landing in the backyard and a gunship overhead. Martha looked at the kitchen island. She remembered Elias spent 3 weeks fixing the plumbing under the sink. Under the sink. Everyone, now! Martha yelled. She ripped open the cabinet doors, revealing not pipes, but a heavy-duty steel slide that angled sharply into the ground. It's a grandma's escape, Martha said with a wild, desperate laugh. Jump. The descent down the steel slide was a blur of darkness and cold air. Martha, Sarah, and Leo plummeted into the earth as the house above them groaned and collapsed under the weight of the syndicate's assault. They landed on a thick, cushioned mat at the bottom of a concrete-lined bunker, miles below the suburban foundation. The sound of the explosion above was muffled, a distant thunder that signaled the end of Martha's old life. "Is everyone okay?" Martha gasped, her lungs burning from the smoke she'd inhaled. Sarah sat up, checking Leo for injuries. "We're alive. But Martha, we're trapped. There's no ladder, no door, just this room." Martha stood up and brushed the dust from her coat. She looked at the walls. They were lined with old-fashioned bookshelves, a comfortable armchair, and a small table with a single, handwritten letter sitting on it. This wasn't just an escape hatch, it was Elias's final sanctuary. It was the room where he had spent his last days, knowing this moment might come. "He knew," Martha whispered, walking toward the table. "He knew the house would fall. He knew they would come for us." She picked up the letter. It was addressed to the woman who kept me whole. As she read the words, a small compartment in the table opened, revealing a final, gold-plated key. "The slide was a one-way trip," Martha explained to Sarah and Leo. "But this room is a high-speed transit pod. It's built on a magnetic rail line that Elias tapped into, part of an old, abandoned government project from the 60s. It leads to the coast." Suddenly, the room vibrated. A screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed the ruins of Martha's home. The syndicate cleaners were picking through the rubble, but they looked panicked. They were looking at their handheld devices. The data dump Martha had initiated was spreading like a wildfire. Across the globe, high-ranking officials were being arrested in real time. The secret society was being dismantled by the very technology they had used to control the world. "They're losing," Leo said, a small smile appearing on his face. "They haven't lost yet," Martha cautioned. She saw a figure on the screen, a man she thought was dead. It was the archive, the janitor from the sewer. He was standing in the middle of her ruined garden, holding a detonator. He wasn't a friend, he was the syndicate's failsafe. "He's going to blow the entire block to destroy the underground rail," Martha realized. "If he presses that button, we'll be buried alive before the pod even moves." Martha dove for the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys she had practiced on in her dreams. The pod groaned as the magnetic rails began to hum with power. Martha slammed the gold-plated key into the ignition and turned it. "Hold on to the chair. Hold on to each other." Through the monitors, she saw the archive's thumb descend toward the detonator. He looked directly into a hidden camera, a chilling smile on his face. He didn't care about the syndicate anymore, he only cared about the treasure. He believed that by burying the Elias family, he could become the sole keeper of the secrets that survived the data dump. Click. A massive explosion rocked the tunnel. The ceiling behind the pod began to cave in, a wall of rock and fire chasing them down the track. Martha pushed the throttle to the maximum. The G-force pinned them against the cushions as the pod accelerated to speeds that shouldn't have been possible. "Grammy, the fire! It's catching up!" Leo screamed. Martha didn't look back. She focused on the internal sensors. The tunnel was 5 miles long, ending at a private cove where a deep-sea submersible was waiting. But the shockwave from the archive's explosion was traveling faster than the pod. The air pressure in the tunnel was rising, threatening to crush the hull of their vehicle. "Sarah! The pressure release valve. Red lever by your foot." Martha shouted. Sarah, despite her exhaustion, lunged for the lever. She pulled it back just as the pod reached the end of the line. Instead of a hard stop, the pod launched out of the tunnel and into the freezing W. They were drifting in the darkness, miles from shore. The pod was airtight, but it was just a metal box in a vast ocean. "We made it," Sarah whispered, pulling Leo into a hug. "Martha, we're out. We're finally out." Martha looked at the monitor. The archive was gone, buried under the very debris he had created. The syndicate was in ruins. The world was waking up to a new reality. But as she looked at the horizon, she saw a single, blinking light. It wasn't a rescue boat. It was a drone, the last one. And it was carrying a payload. "It's a seeker mine," Martha said, her voice trembling. It's programmed to the biometric signatures of the family. It won't stop until it hits this pod. She looked at the small escape hatch at the top of the pod. There was only one diving suit in the locker, asterisk asterisk. The drone hovered above the water, its red eye scanning the waves. It was a cold, efficient piece of machinery, the final spiteful act of a dying empire. Martha looked at the diving suit, then at Sarah and Leo. "There's only one suit," Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. "Martha, what are we going to do?" "The suit isn't for escaping," Martha said, her eyes fixed on the drone. "It's for the bait. It tears of the Atlantic, bobbing like a cork." The fire from the tunnel vented out behind them, a spectacular plume of orange and red that illuminated the night sky. They were drifting in the darkness, miles from shore. The pod was airtight, but it was just a metal box in a vast ocean. "We made it," Sarah whispered, pulling Leo into a hug. "Martha, we're out. We're finally out." Martha looked at the monitor. The archive was gone, buried under the very debris he had created. The syndicate was in ruins. The world was waking up to a new reality. But as she looked at the horizon, she saw a single, blinking light. It wasn't a rescue boat. It was a drone, the last one. And it was carrying a payload. "It's a seeker mine," Martha said, her voice trembling. "It's programmed to the biometric signatures of the family. It won't stop until it hits this pod." She looked at the small escape hatch at the top of the pod. There was only one diving suit in the locker. The drone hovered above the water, its red eye scanning the waves. It was a cold, efficient piece of machinery, the final spiteful act of a dying empire. Martha looked at the diving suit, then at Sarah and Leo. "There's only one suit," Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. "Martha, what are we going to do?" "The suit isn't for escaping," Martha said, her eyes fixed on the drone. "It's for the bait." She grabbed the suit and began stuffing it with the heavy leather-bound journals from her bag, the fake journals she had kept as a decoy. She attached the handheld device, which was still emitting a faint biometric pulse, to the helmet of the suit. "Sarah, listen to me. When I open the hatch, you and Leo have to submerge the pod's ballast tanks. Sink it 20 feet. The drone is tracking the signal on the surface." "Martha, no. You can't stay on the surface," Leo cried. "I'm not staying on the surface, honey," Martha said, kissing his soot-stained cheek. "I'm going to give the wolf his bone." Martha tied a long rope to the diving suit and pushed it out of the hatch. As the suit hit the water, the drone immediately pivoted, its sensors locking onto the biometric signal coming from the helmet. Martha jumped into the water alongside the suit, holding onto the rope. "Sink it, Sarah. Now!" Martha yelled. The pod began to hiss as the tanks filled. It disappeared beneath the waves, leaving Martha alone in the freezing Atlantic with a dummy and a killer drone. The drone began its final descent, the seeker mine humming as it prepared to detonate on contact with the target. Martha waited until the drone was 10 feet away. She could see the reflection of the moon on its metallic skin. With a surge of strength, she heaved the diving suit away from her and dove deep into the dark water. The explosion was deafening, even underwater. The shockwave rolled over Martha, pushing her deeper into the abyss. Above her, the surface of the water was a sheet of flame. The drone was gone, destroyed by its own success. Martha struggled to swim back toward the surface, her limbs heavy and her lungs screaming for air. But the fire above was blocking her path, and her strength was finally gone. Just as her eyes began to close, a hand reached through the bubbles and grabbed her collar. Martha felt herself being hauled upward, the freezing water giving way to the cold night air. She coughed, spitting out salt water, as she was pulled onto a solid deck. She opened her eyes to see the blurry faces of Sarah and Leo. They weren't on a rescue boat. They were on the submersible that had been docked at the end of the rail line. Sarah had figured out how to pilot it, bringing it to the surface just in time to pull Martha from the water. "You're okay, Grammy. You're okay." Leo was sobbing with relief. Martha lay on the deck, looking up at the stars. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free. The secrets were gone. The syndicate was a memory. The grandma who had been told she was no longer part of the family had saved them all. They spent the night in the submersible, heading toward a neutral territory Elias had prepared in the Caribbean. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah sat down next to Martha. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "For everything I said. For thinking you were the enemy. You were protecting your son, Sarah." "I was protecting mine, even if he wasn't here anymore," Martha replied. "We both did what we had to do." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "The world knows who Leo is. They know he's the heir to the architect." "He's not the heir to an empire," Martha said, looking at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully in the corner. "He's the heir to a legacy of truth. And that's a very different thing." As they neared the island that would be their new home, Martha reached into her pocket. She found a small, crumpled piece of paper she had taken from the bunker. It was the back page of Elias's letter. "There's one more thing," Martha said. "The treasure of the elder isn't just the data we dumped. There's a final instruction." She read the note, and her eyes widened. "Sarah. Elias didn't just hide the evidence. He hid the solution." "What solution?" "The codes to redistribute the syndicate's stolen trillions," Martha whispered. "We can't just destroy the bad guys. We have to rebuild what they broke." The island was a lush, green paradise, far from the cold mountains and the gray city docks. For 6 months, Martha, Sarah, and Leo lived in a small white house overlooking the sea. The world had changed. The Great Exposure, as the news called it, had led to a global shift in power. The syndicate's accounts had been drained, and the money was flowing back into schools, hospitals, and communities that had been neglected for decades. Martha spent her mornings in her new garden. This one didn't have explosives or motion sensors. It had real hydrangeas, blooming in a vibrant, peaceful blue. Leo was thriving. He went to a small local school under a new name, finally free from the shadow of his grandfather. He was a normal boy, obsessed with soccer and seashells, but he carried a wisdom in his eyes that only those who have seen the dark can possess. One afternoon, Sarah joined Martha on the porch. Sarah had healed well. She walked with a slight limp, but she carried herself with a strength that rivaled Martha's own. "The lawyers called," Sarah said. "The final transition is complete. The Elias Foundation is now the largest charitable trust in the world." "You did it, Martha. You finished it." Martha looked out at the ocean. "We did it, Sarah. But the treasure wasn't the money. It wasn't even the justice. Then what was it?" Martha reached out and took Sarah's hand, then pulled Leo into her lap as he ran up the porch steps. "The treasure of the elder is the truth that stays when everything else is stripped away," Martha said softly. "It's the knowledge that family isn't about blood or names. It's about the people who will walk through fire to bring you home. It's the wisdom to know that the greatest power in the world isn't a weapon or a secret, it's the courage to be kind in a world that wants you to be cold." Martha looked at the blue hydrangeas, swaying in the tropical breeze. She thought of Elias, and she knew he was finally at rest. She had taken his meddling and turned it into a miracle. "I'm a part of this family, aren't I, Sarah?" Martha asked with a playful glint in her eye. Sarah smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Martha, you are the family. Without you, we were just a story waiting to be erased. Now, we're a legacy." The sun set over the horizon, casting a long, golden light over the three of them. They had lost their home, their names, and their past, but they had found the one thing that no empire could ever buy, a future built on love. The moral was clear: the greatest treasure an elder can leave behind is not the secrets they kept, but the strength they instilled in those they leave behind. The end.